The condominium, 880 square feet, located in Belltown, Seattle. For the first time in 3 hours, I lifted my head and looked at the man who once called me his wife. There are trials that don't spill blood, but still leave hearts shattered. One suburban home in Edmonds, 1 acre in size. One commercial property on Pike Street. Total confirmed net worth, $1,350,000 US. Each word landed like a hammer. The air in the courtroom thinned until even breathing hurt. From the back row, his mother, Margaret Carter, shot up, her voice sharp and furious. "That's impossible." She had nothing. My son supported her for years. The gavel slammed hard. "Mrs. Carter, order in the court." Judge Linda Roberts' voice was raspy, weary, but sharp as steel. I said nothing. 4 years ago, I stood in this same room, begging the court to believe I only wanted to protect my child. Today, I came back not to beg, but to prove I still existed. The plaintiff's average income is $10,000 per month. The judge continued. Legally sourced, tax verified, no shared debt, no mortgage. Nathan leapt to his feet, voice cracking. "She's lying!" I was the one who kept that household alive. My attorney, Victor Lane, didn't even glance at me. He simply replied, calm and precise, "Your Honor, every asset Mrs. Carter owns was acquired after financial separation. Her sole income derives from Bright Path Learning, LLC, a company she founded." Margaret slammed her hand on the bench. "My son helped her! She stole his idea!" The judge turned to her, gaze cold and cutting. "Mrs. Carter, one more word and I'll have you escorted out." The room froze. Even the air refused to move. Nathan's voice trembled. "You destroyed my life." I met his eyes, steady. "No, Nathan. I rebuilt the part you broke." Outside, Seattle rain tapped against the glass, a soft, steady percussion to the silence inside. The gray light reflected off the wooden table, onto the small framed photo of Lila, our 4-year-old, smiling like she had no idea the world could hurt. I once thought marriage was the safest place on earth, until I learned that sometimes the place where someone vows to love you forever is the same place they learn how to stay silent. When the doctor said our baby might have Down syndrome, I held Nathan's hand tightly. He didn't squeeze back. He just whispered, "I don't want a child like that." That night I heard him on the phone with his mother. "I'll tell her to leave." I can't live like this. I stood in the hallway holding a baby bottle, listening to every word. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just knew love had died, and justice was all that remained. 3 months later, he moved to Portland, claiming it was for work. I stayed, alone with my child in an empty refrigerator. I sold my wedding ring, paid the last month's rent, and started searching for online jobs. The first gig paid me $300, editing a manuscript for a small publisher in New York. I worked through the night under the dim glow of my old laptop while Lila slept beside me. At 3 a.m., I sent in the draft, signing with my maiden name, Emily Brooks. For the first time in years, I felt worth something again. From that small contract, I met Tiffany Hayes, a mother of a son with autism. Together, we founded Bright Path Learning, a company creating educational materials for special needs children. 2 mothers, 2 laptops, 1 belief. Those tiny invoices, those homemade teaching videos, those rows of numbers, they became evidence today. Nathan never asked what I was doing. He just sent $1,250 a month with a message. "Hope you're smart enough not to spend it all." He didn't know I had documented everything. Bank statements, contracts, and Lila's medical bills. In my coat pocket today, there's a small USB drive, silent, not yet time. Judge Roberts closed the file. The court recognizes the evidence as valid. Custody hearing to resume after a 15-minute recess. Nathan shut his eyes. I stood, gathered my papers, and stepped into the marble-floored hallway. Cold air brushed my collar. Clean, damp, distant. I looked up at the brass plaque, Superior Court of King County, and I smiled. 4 years ago, I left this place empty-handed. Today, I walked out carrying my name and the truth on my side. South Seattle was beginning to lighten. The rain had stopped. Silver light spread across the road like a quiet promise. Portland would tell the rest of the story, the place where love began and where it finally broke. I didn't look back when I left the courthouse. Only when Seattle's cold gave way to Portland's warm sunlight did I realize I was returning to the place where everything began. Back then, Nathan and I met at an education conference. He worked for an educational software company, and I was an elementary school teacher. He talked about big projects, about helping kids learn faster through technology. I believed him. I believed the warmth in his eyes, the promises, the first handshake that felt like a beginning. We were married in a small ceremony under light rain and lavender on the tables. When Nathan said, "I do," I thought my life was finally safe. But happiness doesn't shatter in explosions. It cracks slowly, word by word, day by day, inside the most ordinary conversations. "You could quit teaching," he said softly. "Stay home. Take care of me and the baby." His voice was tender, but it wasn't a choice. When I agreed, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Good." Because a man needs a peaceful home. Then one day, peaceful turned into quiet, and quiet turned into gone. After he moved to Portland for work, we only talked on the phone. He was always busy, always late, always tired. I convinced myself he was working hard for our future, until one night I received an email confirmation from Maple Residence Hotel, a 2-person reservation under the name Nathan Carter. I said nothing. No screaming, no confrontation, just opened a drawer and took out a small notebook where I began to write everything down. Dates, times, calls, messages, emails, not for revenge, but because I knew truth has structure, and I needed to prove I had seen it, while everyone else kept their eyes closed. 3 months later, I came to Portland. He was at a small cafe on Alberta Street, smiling at a brunette at least 10 years younger than me. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car, watching through the fogged glass. They shared one coffee, one laugh, one look. The kind of laughter that sounds like the world has room for only 2 people. I didn't take a photo, didn't record a thing. I just wrote in the notebook, Portland, 5:32 p.m., June 11th. Sometimes the most powerful proof is the one you never need to show. That night, I checked into a small motel near the Willamette River. In my pocket, $150. On the table, an old laptop, a few blank sheets, and the first rough sketch of what would become Bright Path Learning. I thought about Lila, about her future, about other children like her, kids who just needed to be taught in a way the world hadn't yet learned. I remembered the doctor's words. Children like Lila aren't lacking intelligence, they're lacking opportunity. I named the project Bright Path, not for me, but for her. On the first day, I sent over 30 emails to therapy centers and special needs schools. 2 days later, only one replied. It was from Rebecca, the director of a center in Oregon City. "If you truly believe children learn through emotion," she wrote, "come here. Bring an example." I had no examples, only faith and a short video of Lila saying mama using color cards. I sent it. Rebecca called back, her voice warm and steady. "That's all the example I need. Let's begin." I worked from 6 in the morning until midnight, drawing, recording, editing, testing, failing, restarting. Every night I thought of Portland, not the city, but the man who forced me to leave it to find myself. One morning, after sending our first set of learning materials to a school, I received a reply. "Because of your materials, a little girl with autism spoke her first word after 8 months of therapy." I read that line until the screen blurred with tears. For the first time, I understood what real happiness meant. Not being loved, but being useful. 3 months later, Nathan texted me. I want to talk. There's something I need to say. We met at the same cafe on Alberta Street. He looked thinner, a little older. He said he was changing jobs, that his new company was struggling, that he wanted to collaborate again, this time officially. I asked, "Are you trying to collaborate or to legalize what you once dismissed?" He looked at me, eyes damp. "I just want to make things right. For our daughter," I smiled. "She doesn't need you to fix things. She just needs you to stop hurting her mother." He bowed his head, silence. Between us, only the sound of coffee dripping, slow, steady, like a clock counting down the end of a marriage. I stood, placed a paper on the table, the first tax statement from Bright Path Learning signed Emily Brooks. "This is what I built, Nathan, not because of you, but in spite of you." He said nothing. I walked out. The Portland wind brushed my face, neither cold nor warm, just the temperature of freedom. That night, I wrote one final line in the old notebook. Portland. September 12th. I no longer need proof. Next to it, I pasted a small photo of Lila, tilting her head, smiling, her eyes like mine, but calmer. Maybe justice isn't what the courts declare. Maybe it's that quiet moment when you stand up, breathe, and realize you no longer bow to anyone. And Portland, the place where love died, was also where I finally learned how to live. 7 months after that meeting in Portland, I got a call from Lila's pediatrician. His voice was gentle as mist, but every word landed heavy. "Emily, we need to see you and Lila soon. There have been some changes in her test results. The exam room in Edmonds was blinding white, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of keys clicking, charts filled with sharp curves and endless numbers. The doctor pointed at the screen, lines of genes and enzyme markers glowing blue. "We used to think Lila only had mild Down syndrome indicators," he said quietly. "But the new results show an additional rare neurological disorder. It's not life-threatening, but it will affect her cognitive development permanently." The first thing I asked wasn't, "What do we do?" It was, "Will she still be happy?" He looked at me for a long time, long enough for me to forget to breathe. "She'll be different," he said softly. "But happiness, sometimes it just needs someone who stays." That night, I sat on the floor beside Lila's bed. She was asleep, clutching her old teddy bear, her lips still murmuring new words she'd learned that week. I brushed her hair, each strand catching the light like a golden thread. I once believed I could fix everything with effort. But that night, I learned. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be lived with. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, reviewed every unfinished project, and typed one line at the top of a blank document. Bright Path isn't just a company. It's a promise. The next morning, I emailed Rebecca. "I want to expand our materials for children with more complex needs. It might not be profitable, but it needs to exist." She replied with one line, "Sometimes the brightest path begins in the darkest place." For weeks, I poured myself into the work. Long hours, little sleep, money slipping away. I didn't know that while I was rebuilding trust, someone else was rehearsing an old performance. Nathan began emailing. He wrote that he wanted to see his daughter more often. Then another message. "I'm with a new company now. I could help Bright Path connect with public schools." I didn't respond, but he kept writing. Every week, another offer. Then one morning, a text came. "I'll be in Edmonds this weekend. I just want to see her." I didn't reply, but at 9 a.m. Saturday, his car appeared out front, black sedan, unfamiliar plates, the faint smell of expensive cologne. When I opened the door, Lila was sitting on the floor, arranging color cards. He knelt down. "Hi, sunshine." Lila looked up, silent, then went back to her cards. Nathan forced a smile. "She's just like you, stubborn." I said nothing. I placed a cup of coffee on the table and watched him glance around my apartment. Small, bright, simple, not a trace of luxury. His eyes landed on the Bright Path folders, scribbled notes, and the silver USB. "You still keep everything, huh?" he said, half mocking. "I keep them because I need to remember. Not because I miss it." He smiled faintly. "You know, my company's partnering with a big education group. If you let me represent BrightPath, we could double your revenue." I looked him straight in the eye. Double the revenue or double the control? Silence. Lila began humming one of her lesson songs, off-key but clear. I watched her, then said quietly, "You can finish your coffee and go. She doesn't need promises anymore." He stood, but before leaving, his eyes caught a photo on the wall. Me and Lila, beside the first Bright Path logo. "You don't know how proud I was when you pulled this off," he murmured. "Really?" I said softly. "Because all I remember is you saying, 'Don't waste your time on small things.'" He said nothing, just nodded and walked out. As his car pulled away, I felt neither anger nor nostalgia, just the hollow truth that some people never change. They only learn to perform better. That evening, I opened my laptop. An email from Tiffany, my co-founder, sat at the top of my inbox. Subject, emergency. "M," she wrote. "He contacted our Oregon partners claiming he's a co-owner of BrightPath. He even sent them a copy of the LLC registration." My stomach turned cold. I opened the file cabinet, pulled out the real papers, the originals, signed by Tiffany and me, dated February 12th, 2020. There couldn't be another copy, unless someone had photographed the documents the day I showed them to Nathan last month. I sat still for hours. The rain tapping against the window sounded like memory itself, steady, relentless. I remembered the way he looked at the USB. I thought he was curious. Now I knew he was calculating. I opened my notebook and wrote one final line for the day. "No one can take away what I built if I hold on to the truth." I plugged in the USB and opened the folder named Justice. Inside, every email, photo, invoice, and one recording. Nathan's voice from our Portland conversation. "I don't need Bright Path," he'd said. "I just need something with my name on it." I played that line over and over until the rain stopped and morning light spilled across the room. The screen reflected both our faces, mine awake, Lila asleep beside me. I whispered, "No one teaches you how to be the mother of a special child. But maybe she's the one teaching me how to be a special kind of human." She stirred softly and murmured in her sleep, "Mama." And I knew I wasn't stopping. 3 weeks after the night I opened the Justice folder, everything began to move. Quietly, yet with the precision of a clock counting down to a trap. That morning, I received an email from one of Bright Path Learning's longtime partners. The subject line was only one sentence. "Partnership suspended pending ownership review." I reread it several times, my fingers trembling slightly on the keyboard. In the CC line, Nathan's name. A chill ran through my spine. Not because I feared losing the contract, but because I realized this battle had moved far beyond family. I called Tiffany. "Do you know what's going on?" They said he submitted documents proving he's a co-founder. Her voice broke. "He sent them financial statements from the company, Emily. He knows exactly where we kept the original signed files." I stood there, frozen. Outside, the rain tapped against the window, slow, deliberate, like the gavel of a courtroom forming in the dark. I took the silver USB, plugged it in, and called the only person who could turn helplessness into action. Victor Lane's law office. "I need to see him," I said quickly. "It's about ownership and forged documents." That afternoon, I drove to Victor's office downtown, a tall glass building mirroring the wet Seattle sky. He greeted me in a calm, bright room lined with wood and files. "I've heard about BrightPath," he said, his voice low and steady. "But to file suit, I'll need your originals." I placed the USB and the folder on his desk. "Everything's in here." His voice recordings, the emails, the fake paperwork. He opened each file, the glow from the screen reflecting on his glasses. "How long have you kept these?" "Since the day I realized love could be used as a contract." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. You weren't just betrayed. You documented the structure of truth. And that's exactly what the court will need." That night, I returned home late. Lila was asleep, her hand still clutching her teddy bear. I sat at my desk and wrote to Rebecca, the first person who had believed in BrightPath when no one else did. I explained briefly, ending with one line. "If anyone asks, just say I signed with you myself, no one else." 7 hours later, Rebecca replied, "I'll say it, Emily. And I'll add this. What you built isn't just a company. It's proof that kindness can outlast deceit." For the first time in weeks, I cried. Not from weakness, but from being understood. But isolation doesn't always come from enemies. It creeps in quietly, like fog. Some smaller partners stopped replying. Some parents hesitated to renew their children's programs. Rumors spread faster than facts that my ex-husband was the true mind behind BrightPath. Every morning I opened my inbox to messages that read like death notices for trust. "We need additional verification before extending your contract." Tiffany tried to stay calm. "Don't worry, we have documents. We'll prove everything." But I knew, in America, people often believe the one who speaks first, not the one who's right. One night, after putting Lila to bed, I heard a knock at the door. Victor stood there, carrying a thick folder. "We need to prepare for another scenario," he said gravely. "Nathan just filed for asset division." I laughed once short and dry. Assets? The only thing he contributed was silence. Victor shook his head. "He's listing the company, your apartment, even your education fund. His strategy is to drain you, force you to settle." I fell silent. The room seemed to shrink. Behind me, the wall clock ticked steadily. Time doesn't wait, not even for the innocent. "We can counter," Victor said. "If he's using forged files, we'll file criminal charges." "Do it," I said quietly, not to win, just to stop being threatened. After he left, I brewed tea and sat by the window. Streetlights shimmered against the glass like fingerprints of old memories. I remembered the day Nathan told me, "I just want you to feel safe at home." Back then, I thought that was love. Now I knew it was a lock disguised as care. A week later, the case was officially opened. The opposing side hired a young, polished attorney, confident, rehearsed, perfect for the camera. He sent a mediation letter with a smug note. "Perhaps we should maintain a friendly relationship for the child's sake." I smiled as I read it. How ironic. The same people who once saw my daughter as a burden were now using her as their moral shield. Meanwhile, BrightPath slowed to a crawl. Revenue dropped, contracts were frozen, accounts flagged for review. I watched the graph sink like a heartbeat losing its rhythm. Tiffany panicked, but I stayed calm, because every fall teaches you how to hold on. Late one night, with only the wind sweeping across the porch, I reopened my old notebook. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. Portland, June 11th. I no longer need proof. I added a new line. But sometimes you must prove it to protect what you've built. The next morning, I took Lila to therapy. She smiled, said a few scattered words to her therapist. Before leaving, she turned, hugged me, and whispered, "Mama, strong." I bent down, kissed her forehead. Yes, baby, but only because of you. On the drive home, my phone buzzed, a text from Victor. The court has accepted the audio recording. Prepare for the first hearing. I pulled over by the lake. The water was still a mirror. In it, I saw my face. No longer the frightened woman, but someone ready to step into the light, even knowing darkness stood close behind. When I reached home, a white envelope sat in the mailbox, no sender listed. Inside, a local newspaper. On the last page, a small headline read, Entrepreneur Nathan Carter, the man behind Bright Path, shares his journey as a father of a special needs child. I stared at the words, my heart tightening. He hadn't just stolen credit. He was trying to steal the story itself. I set the paper down, opened my laptop, and typed the first public message on Bright Path's website. Bright Path has no one behind it. Only people who stand tall. That night, I didn't sleep. I knew the next battle would not be between husband and wife, but between truth and a man who believed he could hide it behind a smile. 3 days before the first hearing, I found an old envelope tucked in the back of my desk drawer. Inside was a faded check for $300, the very first payment I'd ever received for Bright Path consulting work. The ink had blurred with time, but it was the beginning of everything. I kept it as a reminder. Everything big once started small. I sealed the envelope again, slipped it into my bag, and drove to Victor's office. He looked at the check, eyebrows raised. What's this, Emily? I want it submitted as evidence of personal funding. No one will say I built Bright Path with my ex-husband's money. He nodded slowly, a glimmer of pride behind his tired eyes. Good. A company isn't just paper, it's a history, and we'll make sure the court hears it. That afternoon, we sat in a closed conference room. The fluorescent light reflected off the thick stack of documents spread across the table. Victor spoke deliberately, each word like a brick laid carefully into strategy. He'll try to prove you used marital income to start the business. We'll counter with proof that Bright Path was built from your own earnings and labor. I'll present the full chain, the $300 check, the invoices, the tax filings, and most importantly, letters from Rebecca and Tiffany. And if he gives false testimony? I asked. Victor smiled faintly. Emily, you forget which era we live in. Truth has a digital signature. That night, I opened my laptop and logged into our company archive. One by one, the invoices appeared on the screen. Tiny amounts, but each one was part of me and Tiffany, built from sleepless nights and quiet determination. I added a note to the final file. Started with $300. Built with dignity. A week later, the courtroom filled again. Nathan arrived with a new attorney, young, polished, with the kind of smile that had been practiced in a mirror. I didn't feel anger, just a quiet distance. As if I were watching the evening news about a man I used to know. Judge Linda Roberts, a woman with eyes that balanced reason and compassion, began firmly. We'll now review the asset division request. Mrs. Carter, your counsel may proceed. Victor stood, adjusted his tie, and spoke clearly. Your Honor, we have evidence that the entirety of Bright Path Learning LLC was founded, operated, and maintained using my client's independent income. Not a single dollar came from any joint account. He placed the $300 check on the table. This was the beginning. The room fell silent. Judge Roberts leaned forward, reading the faded line on the check. Her eyes softened. It looks honest. Then came the counterattack. Nathan's lawyer rose, voice sharp as a blade. Your Honor, this check only proves intent. In reality, during the marriage, my client supported the household entirely. We have records of monthly transfers, $1,200, each proof that he was the financial provider. I looked up, steady. Yes, he did send $1,200 a month, but for the court's clarity, I have detailed expenses. Just Lila's therapy alone exceeded $10,000 per quarter, all paid from my own income. Victor switched on the screen. Invoices filled the display. Therapy sessions, learning materials, business taxes. Numbers don't lie, Your Honor. Nathan forced a smile, but his hands were gripping the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. His lawyer flipped another page. The company's name, Bright Path Learning, was inspired by my client's work in education. Creatively, he has rights to it. Victor didn't miss a beat. Ideas are not ownership. If coming up with a name entitled someone to profits, every author would owe royalties to whoever titled their book. The courtroom murmured, a ripple of quiet agreement. Judge Roberts struck her gavel gently. "Order!" Nathan stood, his voice trembling yet practiced. "Have you forgotten, Emily? I was the one who helped you believe again, who told you you could teach special kids. Without me, Bright Path wouldn't exist." I clasped my hands, steady. "You're right, Nathan. You helped me believe, but you also taught me that belief means nothing without action, and I acted alone." The silence that followed felt final. Victor's slight nod told me he knew we'd landed the point. The hearing stretched for nearly 3 hours. When it ended, Judge Roberts spoke clearly. "The court orders both parties to maintain all current assets until final judgment. However, based on preliminary evidence, Bright Path appears to have been formed independently. Unless the plaintiff provides proof of direct contribution, the claim for division will be denied." When the gavel struck, Nathan approached me, his voice low but tight. "I didn't want to do this, Emily. I just want what's fair." I met his eyes, smiling faintly. "Fairness isn't something people give you, Nathan. It's what you lose when you start lying." That night, I returned to my apartment. Lila was asleep, her hair soft against the pillow. I turned on my laptop and opened the Justice folder. Among hundreds of files, I created a new one, the counter move. Inside, I saved a scan of the $300 check, the court transcript, and a short video I'd taken that morning, Lila laughing and reading the word bright. Now I remembered why I had to keep going, not for revenge, but to protect the truth that was being rewritten, line by line, in someone else's narrative. The next morning, Tiffany called, panic in her voice. "Emily, we just got a sudden audit notice from the IRS. Someone reported us for tax fraud." I paused, then sighed. "It's him again." "What do we do?" she asked. For now, nothing. Sometimes silence makes the truth echo louder. That afternoon, I met Victor and told him everything. He nodded calmly. "Don't be afraid. Every audit is a chance to clean the records. If we're transparent, it becomes our strongest defense." On the way home, I stopped by a small stationery store. I bought a simple glass frame, placed the $300 check inside, and hung it above my desk. Below it, I wrote in silver ink, "It wasn't this money that changed my life. It was the belief that I deserved to earn it." I stood there for a long moment, watching the light reflect across the glass. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, rhythmic, but my heart was no longer cold. Each drop felt like a countdown to justice drawing near. I used to think darkness only came when the lights went out. But sometimes, it stands quietly in the light, just waiting for you to turn your back. A week after the hearing, everything seemed to return to normal. Bright Path was recovering. Several partners had come back once the court dismissed the forgery claims. I spent my Saturday afternoon teaching Lila how to paint. The house smelled of crayons and lavender soap. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, glimmering on the drawings she'd taped to the wall. For the first time in months, peace felt possible. Until I heard a car stop outside. No knock, just the low hum of an idling engine, and then silence. I looked through the curtain, a black sedan, windows tinted. The person inside didn't move. They just sat there, staring at the house. My breath caught. My heartbeat echoed in my ears like a hollow drum. After a minute, the car pulled away slowly, almost deliberately. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, But the next morning, a white envelope sat in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper typed in bold black letters. Stop, if you want to keep what you love. No fingerprints, no smudges. Just the faint smell of fresh ink, cold and sharp. I placed the letter under the desk lamp, watching how the words trembled under the light, as if they'd been written in the dark. I didn't need to guess. Nathan was losing control. I called Victor. Ever seen someone so desperate after losing a case that they start making threats? He paused. Yes. When people lose power, they try to find it again through fear. Keep the letter. Don't respond yet. That night, I added another lock to the back door. Lila slept soundly, her hand clutching her teddy bear. I sat at my desk, watching the small garden beyond the window. The wind swirled a few dry leaves along the stone path. And then, a figure appeared by the fence. Still, unmoving, just watching. I flicked on the porch light. The figure vanished. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house grew louder. The wind through the door frame, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock. That's when I understood what it means to live under threat, not in fear, but in constant readiness. The next morning, I went to the Edmonds Police Department. Detective Hayes took my statement. He glanced at the letter, then looked up. Anyone you've had conflict with recently, besides your ex-husband? He's not just an ex-husband anymore, I said. He's a man who believes that everything he once owned, including me, should stay where he left it. Hayes nodded. I'll file a report, but this isn't enough to prosecute yet. Install cameras around your home, and if you get another letter, don't touch it. Save the evidence. I thanked him and drove home. Outside, Seattle rain started to fall again. Thin silver streaks sliding down the windshield, like the blurred outlines of old memories, warm and cold at once. Victor's words echoed in my head. Truth has structure. Maybe threats did too. They start as fear and then become action. I bought 2 small security cameras, one for the front porch, one for the back. That evening, as I tested the feed, I caught my own reflection on the screen. Me sitting at my desk, the $300 check framed on the wall behind me. For the first time, I realized peace wasn't something that arrived on its own. It was something you had to protect, deliberately. 2 days later, a phone call came close to midnight. No caller ID. I answered and said nothing. At first, only breathing. Then a low male voice. You think the court will protect you forever. All it takes is one more statement, and it all falls apart. Nathan, I said quietly, you just turned a lie into a criminal threat. Silence. Then click. I sat for a long while, listening to rain hit the roof. I wasn't afraid anymore. Just sad. Because some people lose not only control, but also themselves. The next morning, Victor called. The police contacted me. They need your statement, and they want the camera footage. I sent everything. That afternoon, Detective Hayes called back. You did the right thing recording it, but there's something else. At 2:17 a.m., your camera caught a figure walking past the window. He stopped for 13 seconds, then disappeared. I replayed the footage. The light was dim, but the outline was clear. A tall man, dark jacket, short hair, Nathan's build. Hayes exhaled slowly. Not enough to charge him yet, but enough for me to say, you're in danger. I didn't speak. The fear had turned into exhaustion, the kind that comes from running too long, even in your own home, but I wasn't going to run again. That night, I wrote a short post on Bright Path's website. When those who once loved you forget that you once loved them too. It spread quickly. Hundreds of comments from parents, teachers, and survivors of similar abuse poured in. One read, "Thank you." I was scared too. Now I know I'm not alone. Tears fell onto my hands before I even noticed. Not from pain, but from the power of truth returning to stand beside me. A week later, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address, press@seattletimes.com. "Miss Carter," the journalist wrote, "we're investigating a series of post-divorce financial abuse and document forgery cases. I read your post. If you're willing, I'd like to tell your story, this time in print." I stared at the message, my heart tight yet light. The story that had been twisted was finally being called by its real name. I replied, "Let's tell it." Not for revenge, but so others can see that justice sometimes wears the face of a mother. That night, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the streetlights shimmer through the rain. From Lila's room, laughter floated down the hallway, a bright note cutting through the quiet storm of the past weeks. I whispered to the empty room, "Justice isn't revenge, it's repair." The darkness outside was still there, but I knew now. It no longer had the power to define me. 2 days after the call from journalist Rachel Wynn, a text appeared on my phone. "Miss Emily, we're reviewing archived data from a firm called Hartwell & Sons. They used to manage Nathan's accounts. You might want to see this." I read it again and again, my heart beat slow and heavy like a judge's gavel striking wood. Hartwell & Sons. That was the same accounting firm Nathan used to brag about. "They keep everything tidy," he'd said once. Now that very place held the thread of truth. I called Victor. "Can you come with me? If they really still have records, I don't want to go alone." "Of course," he said immediately. "Meet me in Edmonds, 3 p.m. By the time I arrived, the Seattle sky was thick and gray. Rain hit the windshield like tiny needles. The Hartwell & Sons building was old red brick, worn sign a faint echo of decades past. An elderly clerk led us down to the basement archives. The air was cold and metallic, thick with the scent of paper and rust. He pointed to a wooden shelf. "Here's the Carter file, 2018, but there's one folder marked Private, EC. It's sealed." I froze. EC. Emily Carter. With gloved hands, I broke the seal. Inside were stacks of invoices, statements, and a handwritten note, Nathan's handwriting, neat and slanted to the right. "Transfer auxiliary funds of $47,000 to joint account. Purpose, insurance." But beneath it, another note written by the accountant. "Transfer unverified. Source, Special Education Fund." Victor read it aloud, brow furrowing. He redirected money from the Bright Path Scholarship Fund to his personal account. I stood there, numb. He used a fund for special needs children to cover his own debts. "We photographed every page," Victor whispered. "This is the nail in the coffin, and it came from his own hand." We drove back in silence. The rain grew heavier, running down the windows like mirrored rivers of memory. From the back seat, Lila hummed softly off-key, sweet. And in that sound, I remembered why I started all of this. Mama, strong. When I got home, I printed every file and laid them out in order. The deeper I went, the more the pattern emerged, a structure of lies, designed by someone who once knew me too well. Each number was a cut, each signature a wound. But together, they formed proof. I taped a large sheet of paper to the wall and wrote in red ink, "Truth has structure." Beneath it, I pinned every statement, every invoice, every line in Nathan's handwriting. From a distance, the wall looked like a war map. But this wasn't war. This was reconstruction. That night, an email came from Rachel. We confirmed the signature is Nathan's. 3 former Hartwell employees are willing to testify. I could barely breathe. The truth I'd been piecing together, one fragment at a time, finally had a voice beyond mine. I forwarded everything to Victor. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. His voice was alive with energy. "We're filing supplemental evidence first thing tomorrow. Keep everything as is. Then, softer. Emily, you've done something rare. You turned pain into a system. That night, every light in the house stayed on. I organized the files, cleared the table, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, the same one where a shadow once stood. Now, there was no one there, only rain, falling in steady rhythm, and the faint glow reflecting off the framed $300 check on the wall. Beneath it, the silver words shimmered. It wasn't the money that changed me. It was believing I deserved it. Near midnight, a car stopped outside again, the black sedan. This time, I didn't reach for the curtain. I turned on the porch light and aimed the camera toward the yard. The door opened. A man stepped out, holding something. He placed it on the porch and drove away. I opened the door slowly. On the steps lay a rain-soaked envelope. Inside, a single note, scribbled in haste. You won. Hope you're happy. But remember, no one walks away from this hole. No signature, but I knew the handwriting. Nathan. I sealed it inside a plastic evidence bag. No fear, no anger, just a strange, hollow calm. Sometimes, when liars know they've lost, the only thing left for them to leave behind is a curse. The next morning, Victor and I submitted the new evidence to the court. He smiled faintly, flipping through the pages. This isn't just proof. It's a complete logic chain. Motive, action, consequence. Judge Roberts won't overlook it. When we stepped out of the courthouse, the sun broke faintly through the clouds, casting light across the puddles that dotted the street. I saw my reflection in one of them, calm, steady, unfamiliar in the best way. The woman holding the $300 check years ago was gone. In her place stood someone who finally understood. Truth doesn't need weapons. It just needs to be seen. That afternoon, Rachel called again. We're publishing the story this Sunday. The title is The Woman Who Turned Pain into Justice, the story of Emily Carter. Would you like to add a closing quote? I thought for a moment. Write this. Justice isn't a spotlight. It's a quiet room, where a mother organizes her papers in the middle of the night. When I hung up, Lila came running over with a new drawing, 2 figures, her and me, standing side by side on a long road, the sunrise just breaking ahead. Where is this, sweetheart? I asked. She grinned. Bright path, Mama. I hugged her tightly. Outside, the wind still whispered through the trees, but inside me, dawn had already begun. Monday morning, the King County Courthouse opened its doors again. Outside, rain still fell. Inside, the hallways glowed with warm yellow light. I arrived early, carrying a red-tied binder. Inside were the Hartwell & Sons records, Nathan's handwritten note, and the statements of the 3 former employees. Victor met me by the entrance. He didn't say much, just a nod. Today you don't need to win against anyone. You just need to tell the truth. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that settled deep in my chest. The truth, after all, doesn't exist to destroy people. It exists to illuminate what they've tried to hide. Nathan sat across the courtroom. His face was thinner, his suit darker. Gone was the arrogance, only tension remained, tightly wound, like a man holding his breath. His mother, Margaret, was absent. Maybe for the first time in her life, even she couldn't bear to face what her son had done. Judge Linda Roberts entered. Her voice carried through the room, steady as the heartbeat of justice. We will resume the case of Carter versus Carter. Mr. Victor Lane, please present your new evidence. Victor rose, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, our new evidence comes from Hartwell & Sons, the firm that managed Mr. Nathan Carter's finances. The documents clearly show Mr. Carter withdrew $47,000 from the Bright Path Learning Fund, disguised as an insurance transfer, and moved it into his personal account. 3 former employees have confirmed both the signature and the date of the transaction. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Nathan's lawyers stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor! This evidence wasn't disclosed during discovery. Victor replied calmly. Because my client was only recently contacted by an independent journalist. Her investigation unlocked archived data. All materials have been verified legally. Judge Roberts flipped through the file. The paper rustled softly under her hand. She paused, then read aloud the line Nathan had written. Transfer auxiliary funds of $47,000. Purpose: insurance. She looked up, her eyes sharp but calm. Mr. Carter, is this your signature? Silence, then faintly, yes, but I was going to return it. Her tone hardened. But you didn't. And she's the one who carried that debt. Nathan lowered his head. Outside, rain pattered against the window. Inside, you could hear the sound of someone's heart breaking. Maybe his, maybe mine. Victor stepped forward again. Your Honor, my client isn't asking for criminal charges. She only seeks to restore her name and protect their child from the worst of what adults can do to one another. Judge Roberts nodded slightly. Ms. Carter, would you like to speak before I issue a ruling? I stood. My voice was low but clear. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to close the story so my daughter can grow up knowing that justice isn't revenge. It's the act of straightening what was bent. The room fell quiet. Somewhere behind me, I heard someone softly crying. Judge Roberts raised the gavel. The court recognizes the evidence. Bright Path Learning is hereby declared independent property, not subject to division. Custody of the child, Lila Carter, is granted to Ms. Emily Carter. Mr. Carter will provide child support in the amount of $1,875 per month for 10 years. The gavel struck 3 times, sharp, clean, final. The sound echoed like the closing of one chapter and the quiet beginning of another. Nathan didn't look at me. As people began to leave, he sat frozen, staring down at the wood grain of the table, as if searching for a crack to disappear into. I stepped closer, setting the binder down beside him. You once said no one walks away from this whole. You were right. But only those who face the truth get to walk away free. I turned and left without looking back. In the hallway, Victor was waiting. He smiled softly, the way someone does after a long storm. Justice isn't revenge, he said. It's repair, I replied. Outside, the rain had stopped. A soft gray light spread over the city like a veil. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs, and for the first time in years I could breathe without fear. That afternoon, Rachel called. The article's live. It's spreading everywhere. Over 50 parents have written in thanking you. I opened the link. The photos showed me standing outside the courthouse, light falling across my shoulder. The headline read, Bright Path, when a mother rebuilt justice with compassion. Beneath it, my quote appeared in italics. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to exist. I read the entire article, tears falling without warning, not from sadness, but because for the first time in years I realized I no longer needed to prove I was right. I just had to live like someone who survived. That night, I returned home late. Lila was asleep, her lamp still glowing softly. On her little desk lay a new drawing. 2 women holding hands beneath a sky full of stars. In shaky handwriting, she'd written, Mama and Justice. I sat there for a long time, watching how the lamplight shimmered across the glass frame. I touched the words gently, my hand trembling, not from fear but from knowing how far I had come. Outside, the rain started again. Soft, steady, like the quiet heartbeat of life returning to normal. I closed my eyes and whispered, Normal doesn't mean back to before. It means we survived. The court's decision took effect 3 weeks later. During that time, I didn't see Nathan once. The documents confirming my full custody of Lila arrived. Bright Path's accounts were reinstated. Legally, I had won. But deep down, I knew every victory leaves an echo. One early June morning, as I was getting Lila ready for school, the doorbell rang. On the porch sat a small brown-wrapped package. No courier, no name. I opened it. Inside lay the silver necklace I'd once given Nathan on our 5th anniversary. The pendant was engraved with the words, "For every bright path, I'll be your light." I stood there unmoving, the metal catching light that blurred my eyes. Beneath the box was a folded note, the handwriting slanted and uneven. "I'm sorry, but I don't know how to start over." I didn't cry. There was nothing left to cry for. I simply placed the box in a drawer, locked it, like closing the door on a room that had once been warm, now only filled with ashes. That afternoon, Victor called. "There's something you should know," he said. "Nathan's being investigated for that $47,000 withdrawal. A nonprofit he claimed to have donated to says they never received the money. The police want a statement from you." I paused. "Do you think I should get involved?" "You don't have to," Victor replied. "But if you want this story to end fairly, let the law finish what it started." The next morning, I went to the station. Detective Hayes greeted me with his usual calm nod. "We found the transfer," he said. "It looped from his account into a personal crypto wallet. He tried to hide it by faking a donation. All we need is your signature confirming you weren't involved." I signed. Before I left, Hayes asked quietly, "Have you ever thought about forgiving him?" I smiled faintly. Forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door. Sometimes it just means I've stopped standing guard at it. That afternoon, a message came from an unknown number. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted you to remember that before everything fell apart, we were a family." No name, but the tone, I knew it instantly. Nathan still hadn't accepted that some wounds can't be stitched together with apologies. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the message and forwarded it to Victor and Hayes. An hour later, they responded, "Thank you. We'll add this to the file. If he contacts you again, let us know immediately." That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the framed $300 check. Under the lamplight, the silver inscription shimmered softly. I remembered what Victor once said, "You turned pain into a system." Maybe that's the only way to survive. To give shape to loss before it swallows you whole. Lila was asleep in her room, smiling faintly in her dreams. I leaned close and heard her whisper 2 tiny words. "Safe now." I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe now." But deep down, I knew something still wasn't finished. 2 days later, Rachel called. "Emily, something strange happened. A man emailed our newsroom claiming he had proof that you manipulated Bright Path's finances. He signed as NC. I closed my eyes. It's him again. "We checked the metadata," she said. "The files are fake, altered dates, forged names, but I thought you should know. We'll be publishing a public correction." I thanked her. That night, I printed the email and laid it on my desk, not out of fear, but because I needed to see what I was really fighting. It wasn't the man anymore. It was the shadow of denial itself. The next morning, I opened the window. The rain had stopped, but fog still lingered in soft ribbons along the porch. I brewed tea and stood watching as the first light broke across the city. My phone buzzed, a message from Hayes. "Nathan was arrested this morning. Forgery and obstruction of justice. You won't need to testify again. Rest." I read the words and sat down, holding the warm cup in both hands. Not happy, not sad, just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm when you finally stop hearing the rain. That afternoon, I picked Lila up from therapy. Her teacher smiled. "She said a new phrase today, 3 words. She said, 'Mama made light.'" I laughed, tears welling instantly. The light she meant wasn't lamps or sunlight. It was the kind born from people who refused to let the dark define them. That evening, I opened my laptop and typed the final entry in the justice file. June 12th. Case closed. No more threats, only calm and the structure of truth. Then I added one last line. Justice doesn't bring peace, but it builds the room where peace can stay. As I saved the file, the lamp flickered once, then steadied. I looked around. The house was still. No car outside, no envelopes, no shadows by the fence. I blew out the candle and walked down the hallway. On the walls hung Lila's drawings. Me, her, and the sun. Each crayon line, to me, was a final verdict against the dark. Before bed, I opened the window, letting the cold air drift through. Seattle was quiet, the sound of rainwater still dripping from the rooftops. I whispered into the night, dignity is more important than money. And truth always arrives on time. Part 10. The Quiet Room of Justice. A month after Nathan's arrest, I received one final envelope from the court. Inside was the official ruling. 3 years probation, financial supervision, and a restraining order. No surprises, no reason to celebrate, just quiet. A kind of quiet so deep I could hear the clock ticking across the room. I placed the ruling in my filing cabinet, beside the USB, the $300 check, and the letter I never sent. Each item in its own drawer, each drawer a chapter of memory. Looking at them, I realized none of it was evidence against anyone. It was proof that I had lived through it. That afternoon, Rachel called. We're preparing a follow-up article. People want to know what you'll do next. I smiled softly. Nothing grand. I just want to build a quiet room where justice can stay. What will you call that room? The Bright Path Foundation. 3 weeks later, it became real. Bright Path was no longer just an educational company. It became a haven, offering legal and emotional support to single parents of special needs children. On opening day, I stood at a small podium. The late sunlight poured through the glass panels, warm and gold. People clapped, but I only looked at the first row, where Lila sat, drawing, her face glowing, a purple crayon in hand. When I spoke, my voice no longer trembled. I once thought justice was a verdict, but it isn't. Justice is when we use our pain to keep others from suffering the same. The room went still. Then someone began to cry, and the applause that followed felt like waves breaking gently against the shore. That evening, I returned to my apartment in Edmonds. Rain tapped lightly on the glass, scattering the streetlight into silver ripples. I brewed lavender tea and sat down at my desk, opening my laptop. On the screen appeared the list of the first families Bright Path would help. A mother in Spokane, whose ex-husband had taken her child. A father in Oregon who lost his job caring for his autistic son. A 22-year-old girl raising her brother on a retail paycheck. Each of them had written the same thing. I don't want revenge. I just want to live again. I read every line, and it struck me. That's exactly what I once needed someone to say to me. Now I was the one saying it back. One late August evening, as I was tidying up, Lila called from her room. "Mom, look!" She held up a new drawing. 2 women standing in a bright room. On the wall behind them, written in big letters, "Truth has structure." I laughed. "Who taught you to write that?" She pointed at her chest. "Mama did." I sat down and pulled her close. In her small arms, every courtroom, every document, every echo of the gavel faded. There was only warmth and life. That night, I opened the justice file one last time. I added a final note. If anyone asks what justice looks like, I'll say it looks like a child sleeping peacefully in a home where her mother can pay the electric bill herself. I saved the file and closed the laptop. The desk lamp cast a soft glow across the $300 check, still framed. Beneath it, I placed a new tag, from $300 to 300 families. Just then, my phone rang, unknown number. It was Hayes. We've closed the Carter case. He confessed to everything. There's something I think you'd want to know. I'm listening. Before he signed the plea, he said, "I just want her to have peace." I went silent, not out of emotion, but because I finally felt closure. When the one who hurt you wishes you peace, it means the war is truly over. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. Moonlight shimmered on the lake. Everything was so still I could hear myself breathe. And for the first time in years, that breath wasn't guarded. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from Margaret, Mathan's mother. The paper was pale yellow, faintly scented with old lavender. "Emily, I've read everything. I won't apologize for my son, but I know I was wrong not to believe you. If you'll allow, I'd like to see Lila once. I won't mention the past. I just want to thank you for not letting her grow up in hate." I read it in silence, then wrote back a single line. "The door is open, but the boundary remains. We can meet, for Lila." The next afternoon, she came. Her hair was grayer, her frame smaller, but her eyes were softer than I remembered. She knelt and hugged Lila, tears falling into my daughter's hair. She has her father's eyes. I stood nearby, saying nothing. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't need words, it just needs to be witnessed. Before she left, she placed an old photo on the table. Me, Nathan, and newborn Lila. I kept it, not for nostalgia, but because it proved that light once existed, even if only for a while. That night, I set the photo beside the framed check. 2 pieces of evidence, one for the beginning, one for the end. Between them, only one thing remained unchanged: dignity. Outside, rain began again, soft as the city's breath. I whispered to myself, justice isn't the end of the story. It's the quiet room where you can tell it without shaking. Through the window, streetlights glimmered on the wet glass. Seattle was cold that night, but inside me, summer lingered. If you're still listening now, maybe you too have walked through darkness to find your own light. Share the city where you're watching from and tell me, what does justice look like to you? Because sometimes speaking it aloud is how peace begins.